What's good, everyone? Hopefully you guys are doing well, dude. So I just dropped that video of the Samsung Galaxy Fold, and you know what? I figured instead of looking in the future, instead of looking about stuff that's going to happen, let's look at stuff that already happened. And bro, we're taking a look at the highly requested presidential election runner-up, Miss Universe winning Samsung Galaxy Note 2. And I will tell you like this, okay? It seems like I say this about every single phone, but honestly, with the Samsung Galaxy Note 2, I would literally be sitting in class and I would just be dreaming about this phone. I would literally, like, this was whenever this thing was released, 2012, literally sitting in class. I wouldn't dream about girls. I wouldn't dream about like cars. I would just dream about this phone and I'd be like, man, what can I do to get my hands on this phone? And it wasn't until like a decade later almost when I finally got my hands on it. But regardless, it's all about the outcome. And without a doubt, I'll definitely say the Samsung Galaxy Note 2 is such an interesting phone because it went from just being a concept with the Note 1 to eventually being a pretty awesome device with the Galaxy Note 2. I even think the Note 1, all those different variants of it were pretty cool, but the Note 2 kind of took that to a different level. And I think by the end of this video, you'll probably understand, but I did one of these last year, a double I swear on this. And at first I was like, you know what, nobody's going to watch it. It's not even going to be that cool. But this is just such an awesome phone and just a historical figure for Samsung that it doesn't make any sense not to do it anymore. So like I said, this thing came out in 2012 in August, so this year it'll actually turn 7 years old, which is pretty impressive because it wasn't until recently we started seeing phones shift away from this design with like the home button on the front and I guess like the side buttons next to the home button as well. Only recently have we started, I would say within the last like year or two, we've seen most of the manufacturers shifting away from this, and someone would argue and all that other stuff, but this is just kind of, I have to kind of hype it up and change things for the video. But looking around the body, we have a 5.5-inch Super AMOLED display. Now, the funny thing is it is 720p, which is kind of surprising because you have such a large display, but with such a lower resolution. It's only 267 pixels per inch, but before I bash it too hard, you do have to remember that this thing did come out in 2012, okay, almost 7 years ago. So it's not like we're comparing this thing to like the newest phones that just came out, like the Galaxy S10 and all that stuff. We're comparing this phone to other 2012 phones, and what I will tell you is this phone, out of all the 2012 league, this thing I think has the highest chance of being like one of the best phones that you could probably still use 7 years later. I think this is the best phone of that year, 2012. Maybe it was like the Nexus or something, but this was a huge runner-up in that sense. Mostly because, not only because it was a huge phone, I love my big phones, and not only because it had a removable back, removable battery, all that stuff, but because of the S Pen, and that was a huge feature that not a lot of phones at that time have, and not even a lot of phones now have it. I mean, it might seem like a dumb thing, it might seem like a gimmick or something, but that is a huge crucial feature, and I actually appreciate that a lot from a phone, especially the Note line. That's like one additional thing, and I feel like you can still do a lot with that specific part of a phone, which is cool. Like I said, this thing does have a removable back with a removable battery, and you can expand the storage, so that is awesome, which means it has a micro SD card slot for you guys who don't follow up with me. And I'll definitely say, in the hands, it doesn't feel like a completely cheap device when you factor in the age and the price and everything, but obviously it doesn't feel premium. It's pretty much built out of plastic entirely. There's a lot of creakiness going around, but I will say without a doubt that I don't think the build quality was a huge issue in 2012. Eventually with the Note 3, they did actually make it feel a little bit premium, but the Note 5 really brought it up a notch, which was so cool. And I already did a double I SWI on the Note 3 and the Note 4 and pretty much every other Note, so if you want to watch those, you can go search on my channel for those. Now that we kind of covered on how the phone felt on the outside, let's go ahead and talk about the software. And this is one of those things where it's kind of hit or miss, huh? Because look, okay, this thing started off with Android 4.1.1 Jelly Bean. You are able to upgrade it to Android 4.4.2, but if I were you, I don't know, you would have to be blind to keep it on those specific versions of software. I would highly recommend you guys to root this device. Now, I know it seems like Samsung devices are super hard to root, all that stuff, but I've rooted so many Samsungs, and on the outcome, it's always been so much better than keeping it stock. And once you have it rooted, flash a custom recovery on it, whether Clockwork Mod or Twerp or whatever, and put at least an Android Nougat ROM on this thing. I think as of this point, there are Android Oreo ROMs, quite possibly Android Pie ROMs too. I've only briefly looked at the custom ROMs for this thing. I would highly suggest for you to do that because for a phone like this, there surprisingly, I don't know why, but there's still quite a bit of custom ROM community behind it. And obviously I know why, it's a legendary phone. I appreciate it a lot. But the fact fact that there's people who are still spending their time supporting this phone, that is literally awesome. I love seeing that development, even with like back to like Nexus 1. That phone still has a lot of hype around it too, just because people want to try things out and seeing if it's like possible. And I love that. I just want to donate a ton of money to you guys, but obviously I lose a ton of money, so I can't really help you out there, but that's freaking awesome. I love that. So in terms of that, in terms of the software on stock, you're pretty much outdated by like a millennium. But obviously if you custom ROM it, you do have quite a bit of choices there. So that is freaking awesome. So that pretty much covers up the whole software side and how the phone feels in the head. Let's actually talk about the performance now. Now, I'm not going to go too hard, and I kind of feel like I did bash it quite a bit last year, but I do have to kind of put things in perspective because this is not the newest phone. Like I said, this is not competing with the iPhone XS and the OnePlus 6T and all those other phones. This is comparing with 2012 flagship phones. And what I will tell you is that I'll just tell you the specs, get the boring stuff out of the way, and I'll tell you the actual performance of it. This thing had the Exynos 4412 quad chipset, I don't even know, a quad-core CPU, and 2 gigs of RAM, and what I will tell you is, surprisingly, this isn't completely, like, horrible. I mean, really the only bad thing about it is the TouchWiz software on it. I forgot to even mention that, because I was so mind-boggled that they would even put something like this on it. But TouchWiz really, in my opinion, bogged this thing down, and the Samsung Galaxy Note 2, this was probably when TouchWiz was like at its peak of just like raunchiness. God, I hope I use that in the right sense. I feel like after Android KitKat, they started kind of like leveraging it out a little bit, especially with the material design, but it still wasn't too good. For some reason on this one, starting with Android Jelly Bean, even up to Android KitKat, the performance just really wasn't that good. And I would always hear people complaining about the performance wasn't that good on TouchWiz, but when they flashed a custom ROM on it, it was much better. And I feel like it's the same thing here. I mean, all these many years later, TouchWiz still didn't hold up to its task. TouchWiz still didn't necessarily hold up, and it's no fault to the Galaxy Note 2, it's just more so a fault of the software behind it. I think at the time 2 gigs of RAM was kind of a lot for a phone back in 2012, as well as a quad-core CPU. I feel like at the time we were still seeing dual-core CPUs and even like 1 gig RAM devices. But the fact that this thing was even up there, I mean, I'll definitely tell you, when you factor in the age and everything, I'm surprised that this thing still turns on. I mean, I don't think it's a slow device, like completely horrible. A lot of the apps are not supported by the Google Play Store anymore, which kind of sucks, but you can always do like APKs and you can always flash the custom ROM, like I always say. So in terms of performance, I mean, even like heavier intensive gaming, I have to say it, it's not completely horrible. I mean, it's playable, I'll definitely leave it at that. A lot of glitched frames, a lot of different things, but it really just depends what you do with your device. So you're going to be doing a bunch of things with it. I really don't even think a lot of you guys are planning on buying this thing, just more so like a throwback look. So all things considered, I'll definitely say the Samsung Galaxy Note 2 gets an E for effort, but as of right now, I think it's still pretty decent. I mean, I don't think it's a horrible device when you factor in everything. I mean, if a phone manufacturer dropped a phone like this with this type of performance in 2019, obviously people would be in uproar and it would just be sad all over. But I think in terms of performance, it had its time and place, and I think it's not bad at all. Now moving on to the camera, this thing had a single sensor on the back. It's an 8 megapixel sensor. You can shoot 1080p videos on it, and I'll definitely say that the photos, I mean, I'll like, what do you want from me, right? What do you want me to say? That they're good, that they're amazing? Because they're not. But back in 2012, this thing was a pretty good device in terms of photography and all that. So if you want it, it's there if you need to use it. I think one thing that I'm more shocked about is just the amount of features that are still in this camera. And I say this all the time, but dude, phone manufacturers really balled out, especially Samsung. Apple just like totally messes up on this. They need to learn from even the Note 2, even the Galaxy S5, even the Galaxy S4, all these older phones. Samsung just put so many features inside of their camera, and honestly, a lot of them are completely useless, and I feel like a lot of them are just kind of like the same thing, just rematched to something else. But at least they give us those type of options, you know, and that's something that a lot of other phone manufacturers are not giving us. So without a doubt, I'll definitely say the Samsung Galaxy Note 2's camera quality might not be the best, but the camera app, the features within it, all that stuff are very worthwhile, and I'm so glad they did that, because I really I feel like the Galaxy S10 has less features in its camera than the Galaxy Note 2. Now obviously that's a dumb statement, and I'm just kind of saying that, but for sure the Galaxy Note 2's camera app has way more features than the iPhone XS and XS Max, so that kind of says a lot about the Note 2 and kind of says a lot about Apple as well. Again, I'm not trying to make this Android versus Apple thing, but I always end up doing it. Now, let's go ahead and wrap this whole entire video up because nobody's even watching up to this point. This thing had a 3,100 mAh battery. Now, the cool thing is it was removable, but this is what I'll say, and what I've heard back in the day in 2012, 2013, and now what I'm seeing now, the battery life on this phone isn't horrible depending on a lot of circumstances. But back in 2012, people were saying that this battery life was pretty good, and I don't think Android Jelly Bean was crazy demanding in terms of CPU and just in terms of power. And also on top of that, the screen wasn't super high resolution. It was a big screen, but it wasn't like crazy. It wasn't like 4K or anything. But also on top of this, the battery was removable very, very easily. So you could go on eBay or Amazon and purchase some Samsung Galaxy Note 2 batteries and easily swap the battery out. And if that battery dies, just go and swap in another one. And if you really wanted to, you can go and get a bigger battery than the stock one. So if you don't like 3100 milliamp hours, you can easily go and get like a 4000 or 5000 or whatever big size battery they made. You can go and pop it in there and you have that ability. Whereas the new phones right now, you don't have that ability, kind of for a smart reason. But also, this phone in and of itself is pretty timeless in that sense. And that is one thing that you will never be able to be taken away with the Galaxy Note 2 versus a lot of the new phones. And to kind of wrap this thing up, man, I'll definitely tell you, the Samsung Galaxy Note 2, obviously, if you're planning on buying a phone, I would probably recommend you not to pick up a Galaxy Note 2. I wouldn't even say, the Galaxy Note 4 isn't that bad of a device, but I would definitely stay away from the Galaxy Note 2, even the Galaxy Note 3. But I don't want to take away what this phone brought to the table. It brought a large screen, a Super AMOLED, pretty sharp display at the time, the S Pen, a big sized battery, removable battery at that, micro SD card slot, and all in all, this phone, there's still a lot of practicality to it, I think, because if this phone had Android Pie on it, I feel like it could still function just fine, and I don't think there's anything that screams to me that this phone is completely horrible. There weren't necessarily crazy hardware defects with this phone, which is awesome. Of course, there's probably something that went wrong and then people got mad or whatever, but as a whole, 7 years later, this phone is still pretty surprising, and I want to know, dude, do any of you guys still own the Galaxy Note 2? And if you do any of you guys still use it? And if you don't use it, let me know what the oldest phone you're using right now is. I'd really be surprised, but man, that is pretty much it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys have any questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I would really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.